It's the first stamp of the season, and it's a definitive from Egypt. Of course, the imagery of the line-engraved sphinx and pyramid might give it away, but you can also read it at the bottom. Postes Egyptien, French for Egyptian post, which is also written in Arabic on the top of the stamp. The value is 5 milliem of the Egyptian pound. It's 5,000ths of the pound. And again, is written in French and Arabic on either side of the stamp. There is a postmark, and unfortunately I could not make out the year, but only the 2 from the day, which could also be the 12th or the 22nd, and the 9th month, September. This stamp was used and sent from Sawakin, which is not in Egypt. It's a port city in northeastern Sudan, so we'll have to investigate that further. It is of course carmine in color, measuring 24.5 by 20.5 millimeters, and was issued in 1888. This is the first episode of the 4th season of Exploring Stamps. My name's Graham, and I have a large box of used and unused postage stamps from around the world, in which each episode I explore one of those stamps at random. Well, mostly random. Stamp collectors or philatelists enjoy the wealth of knowledge and stories that stamps reveal. So let's get started in the season by exploring this Egyptian stamp that's over 130 years old. When it comes to imagery of Egypt, you cannot do better than this. It is actually the first stamp that I think of when Egyptian philately comes to mind. The artwork is simple and instantly recognizable. The Great Sphinx with the Pyramid of Khufu in the background. I have a thing for classic engraved definitives, and this is a fine example of how a country's identity can be captured on a simple little piece of paper that is ultimately a ticket for a letter to travel between destinations. This stamp design was first issued in 1879 and continued to be in use as a definitive into the early 1900s, of course varying in color and denomination. I have a few in which I've been able to identify the issuing year. 1884 for these 3, 1888 is the one that I pulled from the box along with these ones. Totally love the purple. 10 piastres, wow! Then I have a few from 1892 right through to 1906, I believe. Perhaps the gold-colored definitives portray the scene of Giza best. I also came across a revenue stamp with the same imagery. It looks like this was issued for the Salt Department by the Egyptian government. Yes, I know, not a postage stamp, but a stamp nonetheless. I also have a couple of them on a cover. This registered mail was sent from Cairo in 1910. 2 1 piastre stamps were enough to get the letter sent from Cairo to 5th Avenue in New York City. As we can see, the full journey from the 7th of March to the 24th of March. Just a quick trip of 17 days in 1910. Now, as we saw earlier, the postmark on the stamp that I pulled from the box is from the port city of Sawakin. Sawakin is located in northeastern Sudan and was once a thriving port city. Sudan and today's southern Sudan were under Ottoman and then Egyptian rule from 1821. And so Sudan was using Egyptian stamps, as it was in this case, and had been doing so since its first post offices opened in 1867. Now, what's another interesting piece of philatelic knowledge is that this stamp eventually became Sudan's very first postage stamp, issued in 1897. Sudan began using stamps with its own name by first overprinting these Egyptian stamps in both French and Arabic. And this was temporary, just for 1 year, until Sudan issued its famous Desert Postman stamps in 1898, in which the design was used as the country's definitives for 50 years. But hang on, this is not a video about Sudan's postage stamps. This is a video about Egypt's postage stamps. So let's get back to this stamp. Look for them in your collection. They are not rare or expensive, and you can especially find them used hiding in your stock books, kiloware, or your unorganized box of stamps, as they were used as definitives on letters for several decades. Now, I'm not going to go into in-depth detail about the Sphinx or the pyramids. You can learn about that in a number of other online resources and videos and documentaries. In fact, I think I had it as a subject in my history classes in school multiple times. But the Giza Pyramid Complex and the Sphinx are the ultimate historical landmarks, and so naturally they would be the first choice for imagery on Egypt's postage stamps. Well, Egypt's first postage stamp was issued in 1866, 13 years before the definitive that we've been exploring. There had been a service with hand stamps long before 1866, but this was the Egyptian government's first issued stamps. It features inscriptions over an arabesque design. This was just for 1 year, as in 1867, Egypt issues a pictorial stamp, an image, and that image is the Great Sphinx with a pyramid. Similar concept to the one that I pulled from the box. And there are a couple interesting things I want to call out about this stamp. Firstly, notice that the Sphinx is just depicted with its head and part of its chest. That was the state of the Sphinx in 1867 when the stamp was issued, very much buried over years of drifting sand. Only by 1887 were the full chest, paws, and altar made visible after significant excavation work, and more followed after that. Also, many restoration projects have taken place since, and so the profile of the Sphinx is noticeably different to how we see it today. This stamp is an artifact. It's a record of history. It's documentation of how the world saw ancient Egypt's most famous monumental statue in 1867. And this is considered to be one of the world's first, if not the first, postage stamp to depict a historical landmark, which makes this stamp and early Egyptian stamps even more special. Egyptian stamps have continued to feature imagery of the pyramids and the Sphinx, and even though Egypt's first stamp appears to not feature a pyramid, it actually does. You just need to look carefully on the back. Using a bit of lighter fluid, you can see that the watermark is a pyramid and star. So there we go. Egypt's early history and philatelic history both include pyramids. When you look through a collection of Egyptian stamps, you can sort them based on the several different periods of Egypt's modern history. And that modern history is actually quite complicated. Egypt was a province to the Ottoman Empire, and then a tributary state to the Ottoman Empire, before the British invaded Egypt and later made it a protectorate. And then it became a kingdom before eventually becoming a republic. Okay, so that's province, tributary state, protectorate, kingdom, and then republic. All of these changes taking place within 100 years in which Egypt was issuing stamps. Well, if you intend to collect and explore stamps of Egypt, you definitely need to get a better understanding of this history than what I'm providing, because it will help you to fully appreciate the circumstances and influences in which Egypt's postal history developed, and the stamps have captured that history. The first issues of Egypt have Ottoman Turkish script, and the currency was the Turkish para and kish, as it was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Turkish language on stamps briefly got replaced with Italian, as the Egyptian Postal Service had roots in an Italian postal company, and the stamps were being printed in Italy at the time. And then, alongside Egypt's official language, Arabic, the country started to have French on the stamps, the universal postal language. Then, during the British occupation, it was English alongside Arabic, and then went back to French, and now it's English. So take note of the languages that are used. Quick tip, the spelling of Egypt can give it away. Egypt with an E on the end is French. Now, during its time as a kingdom, from 1922 to 1953, you'll predominantly see two faces on Egyptian stamps. These are the faces of royalty. King Fuad I and then King Farouk I, kings of Egypt and Sudan. The definitives and commemoratives during this time feature profiles of the monarch and sometimes included a pyramid backdrop. This was until the Egyptian Revolution in 1952 that led to the overthrow of the monarch. And you'll find stamps briefly used after that revolution with the former King Farouk's profile blacked out with an overprint such as this. It's like he's peeking through the blinds. I see you. Another stamp worth mentioning is this beauty. It was issued for use by the British forces in Egypt. The story goes that while the British forces were still in Egypt, there was a postal rate increase that impacted letters being sent from Egypt to the United Kingdom. And this, of course, upset the British military, who objected to this rate increase. And so an arrangement was made where personnel of the British military could send letters up to 20 grams, still using the old postal rate of 1 piastre. And this was between 1932 to 1936. And so special stamps were produced. This is one of those stamps, the 5th issue, I believe, from 1934. There were also seals and other stamps issued that are extremely collectible items. I love this one. Look at the gradient font for British forces in Egypt, along with the layout and outlined block lettering of letter stamp that allows the Sphinx to dominate the imagery. It's brilliant. Even after Egypt became a republic, things still got a bit complicated. In 1958, Egypt and Syria united in a political union known as the United Arab Republic, and this union with Syria lasted until 1961, when Syria eventually seceded from it. While Egypt maintained the name United Arab Republic for another 10 years until 1971. And so Egyptian stamps from that time, you'll see UAR, United Arab Republic. Today, Egyptian stamps feature all sorts of topics and themes under the name of Egypt, and their postal service certainly keeps issuing interesting commemoratives, often featuring temples and historical artifacts from ancient Egypt. But not limited to just that. Egypt has some other big things to celebrate, including its culture, sport, industry, but the Sphinx and pyramids do continue to make appearances because why not? They were one of the first historical landmarks on a postage stamp, and they are globally recognized. Regardless of the many political changes that Egypt has gone through in its modern history, the pyramids and the Sphinx were always there, and they continue to remain a part of the nation's identity. This, of course, is only an intro into Egyptian stamps, and there's so much more to explore when it comes to philately, such as Egypt's Palestine overprints, the 1868 Suez Canal Company stamps, and so much more, as well as further exploring Egypt's modern history from the 1860s through today. So I'll leave a number of links in the video description to learn more. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and make sure you are subscribed, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you have Egyptian stamps in your collection? And what topics are you hoping to have covered in this season? As always, thank you for watching and happy exploring.